And welcome to another screencast where this time we'll be discussing the bronchioles and the alveoli as well as the respiratory membrane. So by the end of this, we should be able to identify, describe, and explain the structure and function of a terminal bronchiole versus a respiratory bronchiole, and then a little bit about the alveolar ducts and the alveolar sacs and the alveoli, and then also the structure and the function of the respiratory membrane where the gases are going to be exchanged. So if we look at some of this gross anatomy here we see the trachea, and then we are highlighting here the left bronchiole pathway. So we have the primary bronchus and then secondary bronchi and then the tertiary bronchi here. So these all have these little cartilaginous rings that are keeping those airways open or patent, right, so that air can be exchanged through them. When we get down to the more microscopic level, we have then even smaller and smaller bronchi that have a little bit of cartilage rings on them, and then down to the bronchioles, the smallest diameter airways, and the cartilaginous rings actually end here. And again, this is the microscopic level. So this bronchiopulmonary segment is all of this, these small bronchi, the bronchioles, and then we have terminal bronchioles and then respiratory bronchioles, and then finally ending in these little sacs. These are the alveolar sacs that are part of a lobule or a lobule. And so 1, 2, 3 lobules here in this little bronchiopulmonary segment. So of course you'd have this exact same thing here, here and here and here and here, and you have this happening millions of times millions in the lungs. So this is actually what the lungs are when you look down at the microscopic level. Okay, so there's just a little in place. So let's go look now a little bit deeper here at the mechanism here. This is a very busy diagram, so let me just highlight a couple of things here for you. First, we want to see that this is the branch of the pulmonary artery, right? So this is deoxygenated blood coming out of the right atrium and bringing blood to the lungs. So this is deoxygenated blood coming this way. And so we can trace those are going to branch this way. Blood's going this way. Right, here's a little arteriole. Blood is going this way. And then down into these capillary beds here. And these capillary beds are all surrounding the alveoli. And so then blood would flow into these capillary beds this way, and blood flowing out of these capillary beds into now pulmonary veins. And so they've picked up oxygen, and then this pulmonary vein is going to be then delivering blood back to the left atrium. Right? Sorry, this shouldn't be right atrium. This should be right ventricle. Right? Those of you that were looking at that saying, Schweitzer, you screwed that up. Yes, I did. There you go. So that should be out of the right ventricle and then into the left atrium. Sorry about that. Right? So this is just kind of the general blood flow. Now let's go back and look at the airways that are accompanying this. So we are down at this respiratory, they're showing the respiratory epithelium lining this. So this is the airway. Right? And then there are smooth muscle around those airways that are able to constrict and dilate and open or close those airways. This is a terminal bronchiole here, and then down to the respiratory bronchiole where the cartilaginous rings have ended here. So in this terminal bronchiole and the respiratory bronchiole, there's no cartilaginous rings. These respiratory bronchioles then will open up, and here they've made a section through that. So the respiratory bronchioles give way to the alveolar duct, and then into the alveolar duct into one alveolar sac right here. So this is the alveolar sac. Right? And so this whole structure is one pulmonary lobule, right? And then you have millions of these pulmonary lobules all throughout the lungs. Right? So now what we're going to do, it might be a good idea here just to kind of pause and get the flow of the air from terminal bronchiole, respiratory bronchiole, alveolar duct, and then into the alveoli. themselves, right, into this alveolar sac and then into the alveoli. So this is kind of the flow of things. Right? So now we're going to look at a detailed version of one of those alveolar ducts and in the alveoli themselves. So again, first we see blood flow this way and blood flow out this way into these capillary beds. These capillary beds are all surrounding the alveolar sacs. Again, so respiratory bronchiole up here, alveolar duct leading into one alveolar sac. This is the alveolar sac. And then the alveolus itself is singular, alveoli is plural. So these little lobed structures here, or these circular structures here, are not flat. So this is to increase the surface area. If I increase the surface area, I can do more gas exchange there, rather than having it just come in like this and then end in a squared off or end in a rounded off. So as I do this, I increase the surface area. Notice that I'm applying more ink here, more ink, more surface area for gas exchange. So these alveolar sacs are, of course, again, surrounded by these capillaries, but then there's also these elastic fibers that allow the alveolar sacs to expand and contract and snap back into place. And yeah, so some detail there. Now we're going to go zoom in, look real closely at one of these alveolar sac areas, locations. So here we are in the alveolar sac area, and now we can actually see the cells that are involved with this. So the cells that are part of this alveolus are these alveolar squamous cell epithelial cells, and these are the pneumocytes or lung cells type 1. So just simple squamous epithelial cells. Little nucleus there, flattened out cells. The other cells that are present are these septal cells, right? And these are the pneumocytes type 2. And these septal cells are the ones that secrete the surfactant. And that surfactant is an oily substance that helps to decrease the surface tension, and we'll deal with that concept in another screencast. That says surface tension. Right? So the surfactant helps lower surface tension in there. Right? Also, another type of cell that are in there are these macrophage cells, and these macrophage cells are white blood cells, right, types of white blood cells that are able to, as you can see, migrate from the air spaces, right, through the connective tissue and then get into a capillary. Right? And so these macrophage cells are engulfing, that is eating dust particles, any sort of foreign debris that may have found its way down into the airways there. And so these are immune system defense mechanism cells. Right? Pardon me. The final structure we want to detail here, again, is of the capillaries themselves. And we notice that these capillaries are sitting in a bunch of connective tissue, or finding their way through connective tissue. And that connective tissue has a lot of elastic fibers in it that, again, allow those alveoli to expand. Right? And these capillaries are lined with endothelial cells, and these endothelial cells will be secreting that ACE, or that angiotensin converting enzyme, that is playing a role in monitoring blood pressure. Right? So the blood pressure that's coming through these capillaries, if it's too great, you're going to have edema or swelling. Right? You're going to have plasma leaking out there, right? And then building up into the airways. Right? And that is not a good situation. Right? So you don't want to have any sort of pulmonary edema there. So that angiotensin converting enzyme will convert angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2, which then has blood pressure regulation functions. Okay? So now might be again a good idea to pause here and kind of summarize that, because we're going to go look at this interface right here between the capillary and the alveolar cells and look at that respiratory exchange membrane here. Right. So let's orient ourselves here a little bit. So this is the capillary lumen up here, and here's a red blood cell. Right. So this is the plasma. And then here is the nucleus of the endothelial cell over here. So this is the endothelial layer right here. So this is a cell right there. Then between that cell of the endothelium of the capillary here, here is the alveolar epithelial cell right here. So this is another cell. And between them is that basement membrane. So the basement membrane of this epithelium and the basement membrane of this epithelial cell are fused together, right? And now this distance is only half of a micrometer, right? So this is a micro. This is prefix for micro, which is 1/1000th of a millimeter. Right? So we're talking about very narrow, very small distances here. In some places, this distance is up to only 1 micron, right, or micrometer thick. So the very thin nature here allows oxygen that's here to diffuse rapidly across the cells because it's lipid soluble, and allows any CO2 here to diffuse across very rapidly and get into the alveolar airspace. Right? So the structure of this membrane, this respiratory membrane, is important, right? Because the thinner this is, right, the easier the exchange is. Right? There's this little light blue right here is supposed to be a fluid that is secreted by these endothelial cells, sorry, these epithelial cells of the alveoli, right? So this is a little bit of mucus here that allows the oxygen and carbon dioxide to be dissolved and diffuse a little bit more rapidly, right? So there is the microscopic anatomy and a little bit of gross anatomy of the bronchioles, the alveoli, and then the respiratory membrane, right? So if you have questions on these, please bring them to class, and thanks for listening.